Tune into the final take with MK Mariner every Saturday on the Alcamba Times and experience extensive conversations on a variety of topics, including national and international headlines, breaking issues, and major developments in politics, business, innovation, science, and sports, along with inspiring stories and expert analysis to provide a comprehensive understanding of the news.
Hello, wherever you are watching, a warm welcome to the final take. We return for another week of exciting discourse, exploring current affairs in the Gambia and around the world. This week, a special conversation with Madi Jobarteh, Executive Director of the Edward Francis Small Center for Right and Justice on President Barrow's third-term ambition and the Gambia's 16th Jubilee Independence celebration. Examining advances made in 6 decades of self-rule. We'll also bring in our next guest, Melvin Foote, a prominent African-American civil society leader and the founder and president of Washington, D.C.-based Constituency for Africa, a civil society group founded by Mr. Foote, who has been at the forefront for advocating for Africa and its people. That's the final take with me, Seni MK Marina. Thanks for joining us. We will take a quick break, and when we are back, we will bring our guest, Madi Jobarteh.
Tune into the final take with MK Mariner every Saturday on the Alcamba Times and experience extensive conversations on a variety of topics, including national and international headlines, breaking issues, and major developments in politics, business, innovation, science, and sports, along with inspiring stories and expert analysis to provide a comprehensive understanding of the news.
Warm welcome to the final take with me, Seni Marina. Wherever you are watching, this is Mr. Marina with Mr. Jobarteh coming on your way on our virtual studios here in Seattle. Let's go straight to the conversation. Mr. Jobarteh, many thanks for joining us. Gambia reaches a critical juncture as the president seeks a third term. How would this impact the existing effort to strengthen the country's democratic dispensation?
It will be a terrible blow, certainly. But first to say, I'm glad to be back. On the final take with MK.
Yes.
And keep up the great work. I followed the conversations, and you raise critical, pertinent issues. And so I think you are contributing immensely to democracy, good governance, to the development of the country with this platform. So congratulations for that. And so, to continue that conversation, MK, I think it is very, very unfortunate and very sad that we would have yet another president, to take us through a blunder like this. They said today is our 60 years of independence.
Yes.
And Jawara spent, about 30 years as president or leader of that country. By 1994, the socio-economic conditions were really terrible for the Gambia. Corruption, inefficiency, was widespread within the public sector. And when we had Jammeh, it was a unique opportunity for Gambia to halt and reverse, make a turnaround, and start real building of the country. Jawara had ideas and visions of that, but unfortunately he was not able to, materialize, practicalize, the building of the Gambia as it should. Even though he created some very important institutions and so on. So 1994 was a unique opportunity we had, but we saw how Jammeh plundered it. First, he should not have gone beyond 2 years to respect the 2-year program, so that he, would, organize the country in such a way that we would have gone through a elections and then have a civilian government and hopefully see the transformation of the country begin from there. But that decision by Jammeh to abandon the 2-year program, to abandon returning to the barrack, or even resign, but rather to stand for election, I think was a terrible decision. And 20 years later today, we are, or 30 years later today, we are in a similar situation. A lot of mess happened between 94 and 2016, 2017. And Barrow took over in 2017. There was a huge opportunity at that time for Barrow also to turn around, make a turnaround. And that would include one, respecting the 3-year agenda, which he, flouted, failed to respect. But even there, to make sure he sticks by the 5-year mandate, was holistic legal, institutional, and constitutional reforms, so that in 5 years he would have made a serious transformation of the country, and let the country go to an election without him. So we made a terrible error, or he made a terrible error down there, mistake by rather abandoning 3 years, going for the 5 years, and practically doing nothing to bring about the necessary reforms. And now to come this far, 8 years into his office, I mean, after having a second mandate, which will end in 2026, to now imagine that he would think of a third mandate. I think that is a huge mistake, both for himself and for the Gambia. It means we are once again repeating the errors of the past, in 1994. And one can even go way back to Jawara, to 1991 or 92, when Jawara made the decision that he wants to, retire, from as president of the Gambia. I think that was a huge error on the part of Jawara too, to abandon that idea. If he had resigned, retired by 1992.
But comrade, the same thing Barrow said, it's look like similar to what people who were close to former President Sir Dawda did in Mansa Konko. Barrow said his political party is too young and he's afraid that the party might die, should he leave the mantle of leadership. Do you think that that's a genuine reason to self-perpetuate in power after 2 terms?
No, it cannot be a genuine reason. Rather, it is a manifestation of corruption. Okay. The only reason Barrow wants to stay for a 3rd term, and which a decision by him and his so-called supporters or advisors, all right, is because having accumulated so much wealth over the period, all right, having committed all sorts of violations, all right, unlawful acts, Barrow has got to a point to realize that there cannot be, a turning back. All right, he cannot leave this office because he needs to protect his wealth, which means his supporters, those people close to him, need to support their wealth that they have accumulated, and they don't want to be held to account for unlawful acts that they have committed, and therefore the logical thing is he would have to stay in power. Otherwise, he would have to get someone as trustworthy as he can have to replace him, so that nobody would follow him. Because MK, this is the only narrative why African presidents want to perpetuate themselves in power. It is nothing other than 1, corruption, and 2, violations. All right. Through the corruption, they accumulate so much wealth.
Right.
And they need to protect this wealth. They want to live with this wealth. They don't want this wealth to be taken away from them. And so the only way to guarantee that is to stay in power. And so the second element is, if you violate the laws, you violate rights, all right? I mean, there will be accountability. Absolutely. So for your security and for your wealth that you have, acquired, accumulated, committed during your tenure, it gets to a point that you realize, I cannot leave this place. So that's why Barrow, because he clearly has no reason other than to say my party is young. I mean, in the history of self-perpetuation in power, we have never had any president give that kind of a reason, because my party is young.
Yeah.
I mean, that is unbelievable. But clearly, what he is just telling us is that I am afraid to leave, because if I leave, the wealth I have accumulated would be taken away from me. The violations I have committed, I'll be held to account. That's why.
So you want to say it's because of insecurity that President Barrow wanted to seek another term, because if he get out from that position right now, he's going to face the law for what he has done.
Yeah, I mean, look, when Jammeh left, we set up commissions.
Absolutely.
Right? I mean, we set up commissions, and even Jawara, when he left, when they kicked him out, they set up commissions. So if Barrow left, there will be commissions, because it is very obvious the corruption in his government, involving himself. All right, the Minister of Lands, Hamad Ba, that he gave Barrow land that was earmarked for the Chief Justice. Yeah. Now, which is totally unlawful. So this is what I'm saying. If Barrow leaves, he'll have to be held to account for that land which would be taken away from him, but also for violating the law. And Hamad Ba for violating the law. So Hamad Ba would be somebody who would not want Barrow to leave. Yeah. Because Hamad Ba knows he has violated laws. All right? And not to mention the corruption. So this is the only reason these African presidents don't want to leave. It's just like Macky Sall. He did not want to leave because, he has accumulated so much wealth. He has committed so much crimes, and he would bring all sorts of cock and bull stories just to justify the, self-perpetuation in power. But that's absolutely no reason, because at the end of the day, this is not a birthright. All right? Out of 2 million people, our system is such that we elect among us, all right, ourselves, somebody to be president, somebody to be parliamentarian, somebody to be a councillor. We elect appoint somebody as a minister and so on. So if you are in public office, it is not like your personal property. It is not yours. It is entrusted to you. So common sense tells you that if you are in public office, it is just a matter of time, particularly elected office, because maybe if you are appointed in the civil service, you can be there until you retire after many decades. All right? But then you'll be held to account anyway. But for the elected office as president, you are there for a term. And what is the purpose of that? To serve the people. According to the law. But if you refuse to serve the people according to the law, you violate the law, you plunder their resources, you know very well this is not mine. It's not yours.
And you will be held accountable one fine day.
Yeah, that's recorded. So this is not a difficult thing to understand.
Comrade, how would you assess President Barrow's current administration in the context of Gambian political history? Is history repeating itself?
I mean, I tend to say yes, but also I don't want to say that. Just to say that Barrow's government is horrible. Okay, because. And I think it is the worst. Okay, even though we have not reached a point like extrajudicial executions and enforced disappearances and so on, it is the worst in the sense that MK, because we saw Jawara and we know the mistakes of Jawara. All right, and then the mistakes of Jawara generated, Jammeh. And we live with that as well. Most Gambians live with the Jammeh, misrule. And how terrible it is. So if someone who went through that first republic with Jawara, you went through the terrible time with Jammeh, you would have imagined that as mature people with common sense, all right, people who love themselves, that the last thing we would want to do is to look anything like Jawara, especially Jammeh. Now, to have someone follow that path of Jammeh, I mean, look at Barrow's government. You bring all these Jammeh enablers. They
Yeah.
are, National Assembly is led by Jammeh enablers in his cabinet. All right, you refuse to get us a new constitution. We are still using that constitution. I mean, the malpractices of the past across the board, the corruption, the negligence, the waste, you know, for someone to come back again and repeat that as a Gambian, I mean, who has lived through all this, I think is worse. You know, yeah, I think it's worse. I mean, it's indescribable. So for me, Barrow's government is such a disaster because the opportunities are there. 2017, international level, at the local level, at the regional level, everyone wanted to support Gambia, such that
Yeah,
um,
I want to ask that there was a high level of goodwill from the international
yes,
communities. I remember
yes,
when the new administration take up in 2017,
mm,
the European Union, including regional powers, there was a huge donor conference that was held in Brussels in May
yeah,
2018 that
yeah,
galvanized international support for Gambia. But what happened next? With all those political commitment to help
yeah.
the Gambia, recover from 22 years of brutal dictatorship has gone in vain. What went wrong, Madi?
Yeah. Well, what went wrong is the betrayal, is what happened. Barrow, as an adult Gambian who has lived through the Jawara period and the Jammeh period, to the point that he even joined, an opposition party, which was, confronting Jammeh more than anyone, the UDP, and
Yeah,
where his comrades were killed, were tortured, and raped.
more that mhm.
Right? So it tells you this man knows what is the problem of the Gambia. Okay? To now have the opportunity for Gambians to select you to lead you, you cannot say you don't know. You cannot tell us you don't know where we came from and where we need to go. All right? So for that man to come turn around 300 and 60 degrees, and you go back to follow that Jammeh, man, it is the greatest betrayal, one can explain. So what happened is the betrayal. But Barrow, the moment he became president, he showed Gambians his true colors, that he has no values, he has no sense of patriotism, he has no sense of responsibility, and he is in that position purposely to satisfy his own selfish greed. And this is why that roundtable summit you talked about,
Yeah, in
pledges
Brussels.
were made up to
Mhm,
1.4 billion euros or something like that. I mean,
mhm.
and the pledges that came were insignificant. And since then, it has been plunder after plunder, all right, derailing national progress. And, so the point that we are at today is such a disaster.
So as a right a prominent right activist, you think that the donors felt the other way around, that there is a lack of political commitment to reforms, that is why they hold their fundings to some extent
Yeah,
to support the government.
yeah, yeah. So the donors, let's say EU particularly, because they also claim they are tying their aid to human rights and good
Yeah,
governance. So they have um, kept some, funding away. All
yeah.
right, which we saw even during Jammeh's time that happens. All right. But at the same time, of course, they would provide the necessary or the usual budget support, and the aid is coming anyway. I mean, through loans and grants, you
Yeah.
can see all these projects in agriculture, health, education, energy, security, sport, everywhere. So that would happen. But for me, that is not the key issue, because the point is the so-called donors. At the end of the day, are not really bothered, okay, because at the end of the day, EU and the US, UK, or whether it's China or anyone, they want to have control. They want to dominate, and and of course they want to benefit. And all of these aid also gives them huge benefits in terms of that. So even the most autocratic regimes in Africa, let's say in Museveni, in Cote d'Ivoire, I mean in Uganda. Or the most corrupt regimes, let's say Paul Biya in Cameroon. So these donors still support them through IMF, through World Bank. I mean, so the US, nowadays is the USAID and all these, people running helter skelter. But at the end of the day, the USAID was not necessarily given us free. It was all part of a mechanism of American hegemony control through aid. So aid is political. Aid is not just for our interests.
Right. Yeah, that's why some will argue that these aids are tied to certain things, and that shows the double standard of most Western countries. Because in the case of Uganda and Rwanda, Rwanda right now is involved in DR Congo heavily. But US is one of the biggest donors to Rwanda, and Rwanda has some human rights issues. Don't you think this aid stuff is tied to double standard of the Western nations? They don't care about us Africans to an extent that we have dictators and they are still giving aid to dictators.
MK, I'm an anti-aid person. Okay, because I know aid is politics. Aid is about power. All right, and so let me give you this scenario. The EU and the US, for example, they give support to Jammeh, okay, through various
programs,
projects, okay. But they, at the same time, the State Department releases a report every year, State of Human Rights in the World report.
In each country.
And the Gambia section, they will list all the rights violations that Gambia is committed. Okay, and sometimes they would even mention the Gambia, the Secretary of State, and so on. All right. And at the same time, they are giving us in the civil society grants through the embassy and State Department and other programs. NED, they have donor agencies like NED, NDI, and so on. All right, to support human rights and democracy. All right, they engage with the political parties so that at the same, when you look at that scenario, based on that trajectory, it means we can, left to the donors alone, we can be with Jammeh for donkey years. We will never change him. Because as they are supporting civil society, they give us asylum, all right, and so on. At the same time, they are supporting Jammeh. And because Jammeh had advantage of the state, you realize that the state will always be more powerful. So the USAID or US government or the EU are not going to support, Alcamba Times or Aero Transport Center or Tango or, DOE or UDP in any way to the point that they are going to remove the government. I hope you see the point. So
I'm getting it.
So this is the logic. I mean, the politics of aid that a lot of the time we don't understand, but because we are in civil society, we are in the media. I mean, we are excited about Western support because they give us asylum. They, Jammeh wants to prance on you. You run to Senegal and they give you help there, support there through their agencies, and so on. But that still doesn't solve the issue until we the people come together on our own. That's when we remove Jammeh.
I will come to that because I have a special guest who is an African American who will be joining us shortly to talk about this Trump Africa foreign policy and also the close-up of US aid. I see you are not a fan of Donald Trump, but are you in any way in support of his action to shut down US aid? US aid across the continent, because US aid is involved in funding civil society organizations, governments, and multilateral groups and so forth. Are you in any way in support of Trump action to shut down the US aid?
No, I'm not.
You are not.
but I don't support U.S. aid.
But Madi, if you don't support U.S. aid,
because if I support Trump's decision to do so, it would mean I would support Trump's reasons for doing so. And I know Trump's reasons for doing so is a white supremacist imperialist agenda.
Oh, wow.
All right. And I don't support that. Okay. But the idea of aid, the US government has used USAID also as a covert operation for regime change and for US propaganda across Africa and South America and Latin America. So I'm not excited about USAID because I know, I know. All right. So whether it's USA,
but this put you in a very funny situation. You are anti-aid, but you are not supporting a shutting down of US aid.
No, I'm not supporting Trump's decision to shut down US aid.
Okay.
I want USAID to be shut down or to get away from Africa in other ways, but not through Trump, because Trump is evil. Trump is a white supremacist. Trump is imperialist, and there is nothing good about Trump. So I don't support Trump on any decisions he's made, even if that decision appears to be good, like what he did with the aid issue. I hope you understand the difference here.
Absolutely. Okay, Mr. Madi, we have our guest here, who is a very prominent African-American civil rights leader, Melvin Foote. You guys are all very prominent in your advocacy. Melvin, just a minute. Welcome. You are on time, because we are just discussing about the Trump's shutting down of U.S. aid and its implication in Africa, with particular emphasis on the Gambia, because Gambia is also benefiting a lot from the aid that is given by the United States government. Mr. Jobarteh said that he is against aid for Africa. Melvin, what's your take on the shutting down of U.S. aid and its implication for development in Africa?
Well, for sure. Thank you very much for having me. I always like to talk about Africa and to make these assessments. Well, of course, we here in the United States, we're very much shocked and disillusioned by the early steps of the Trump administration in the second time around. Many of us expected such moves, but we didn't expect it to be so great. In terms of USAID, I personally am engaged. My daughter, in fact, is with USAID in Jamaica, so I'm personally affected by it, and so it has really disrupted what the U.S. Has done humanitarily around the world. I am very disappointed with this move. You would think that the least, the last thing that the Trump administration ought to be doing is touching foreign aid, especially as it relates to humanitarian assistance and support, HIV/AIDS support, support for family planning, and these kind of things. Why would you want to attack these first? We know what he called Africa in the first time around. Somebody just, he talked about Africa in the most vulgar ways. We all were just shocked to hear the U.S. president calling the billions of people in Africa, such a vulgar name. So I'm disappointed with it. We're doing all we can to slow this down and to reverse it as best we can. But I think the U.S., which is the richest country in the world, how do you say you're going to ignore what goes on in Sudan? How are you going to ignore what's going on in the Central Africa Republic and what's going on in the Congo? The U.S. is not going to be involved in providing humanitarian relief. U.S. is not going to be involved in helping people who are hungry. Come on. So we have a great fight ahead of us, but I'm very disillusioned with this move by the Trump administration.
Thank you very much. For those watching, this is the final take with me, Seni Marena. In the studio, I have two prominent right activists. Other one is a civil rights leader in the United States, Mr. Melvin Foote, and Madi Jobarteh, who is also another leading well-known human rights defender in the country. Mr. Jobarteh, do you agree with Mr. Foote about Trump shutting down the U.S. aid to Africa and its implications?
Yeah, so I mean, the fact of the matter is, in the current dispensation, U.S. aid, like aid, coming from the U.S. and Europe to Africa, could target vulnerable people, poor people, or with the intention to, address socio-economic challenges and things like that. So that on the basis of the narrative, it sounds innocent. And certainly, there are individuals in many hospitals in the Gambia, people suffering from HIV/AIDS, people having maternal and child health issues around in Africa, malaria, into which a lot of aid is going to maintain programs and services and goods that, yes, individuals continue to benefit. So I agree, therefore, when we have a situation now that to stop that, the impact would be huge. I mean, a lot of people will be affected. Now, but for me, the narrative goes beyond that, because I heard him say, for example, the US is the richest country in the world. Now, and people make that comment pretty easily. The question we have to ask, how did US become wealthy? And how is US maintaining its wealth in the world? So that at the end of if you do that analysis, you realize that the wealth that US claims to have, a lot of it is through, violence, is through, unfair practices, is through, imperialism and white supremacist programs. All right, whether it's from slavery days until now, and the hegemony that the US have maintained, say on Africa, what US makes out of Africa per annum is more than what they give to Africa. So that when you look at it, US is not even a donor to Africa. Rather, Africa is the donor to the US until now. When you look at US own figures, you look at World Bank, IMF figures, you got European Union figures in terms of how much money US through its companies and so on are making out of Africa through legal and illegal trade, all right, and other illicit means. The EU, China is more than what they give to Africa. And so what has happened over the period is that US, through this aid narrative, the West has imposed a culture on Africa, or Africans have submitted themselves to a narrative that has weakened Africa, promoted misgovernance, because instead of US giving support to those communities, individuals, it is African governments that bear responsibility to make sure they provide necessary goods and services to their people and create the opportunities. But they don't do so. And they are so corrupt, in their countries in Africa. All right. And because the people also have been dependent on the aid that is coming from the West, the people, therefore, don't anymore care about their government. They don't hold the government accountable because they know at the end of the day, the donors are there through their civil society, CSOs, NGOs, are going to address their needs. So when you put all this together, you realize that aid in Africa is at the heart of the misgovernance, the corruption, the poverty, the deprivation, the inequality, and the violence that we see in Africa, for which it has to stop. So I don't, as I said, agree with Trump, because Trump's reasons are white supremacist and imperialist reasons. All right. I don't agree with anything that Trump does. Okay. But that aside, when we come to aid, I am anti-aid.
Okay.
Because aid has immensely.
Hold on there. Melvin, you have been engaged in Africa for the past 40 years. You met both Democrat African leaders and dictators. Do you agree with Mr. Jobarteh assassin?
Well, actually, it's been 50 years. I got started in 1973, and
wow.
I'm an African. First of all, I'm an African too. I was just
Of
happen to
course,
be born in
of
America. That's it.
course, you
You
are.
We
know,
are proud to have you.
40% of my DNA is Ivorian, 20% is Ghanaian, 10% is
Wow.
Nigerian. I
Wow.
speak languages, I speak Amharic, Tigrinya. Tell me I'm not African. So,
No, you are African.
tell me I'm not African. I think I know more about Africa than most Africans. Huh? So
We
having said
agree.
that,
You're African.
but to say that, this is about the role of the African diaspora. I'm in the United States, which is the wealthiest country in the world, and I'm in Washington, D.C., which is the most powerful city in the world. Is
Yeah.
it not my job to push this country to help Africa? Now, how we do it is up for debate. Certainly we ought to be promoting trade and investment. Certainly we ought to be doing AIDS support for Africa. We also need to be transferring technology and also building culture, because us helping Africa also is a way for Africa to help us. The biggest problem with African Americans is by and large, they don't know who they are. They don't know where they come from. They don't know anything about their culture. So we over here trying to act like Mzungu. I don't know if you guys know Mzungu. We're acting
Yeah,
like we're the white man because we
yeah.
don't know who we are. And then we got all kinds of problems associated with that. So I think what we're trying to do here is to unify Africa. Something Kwame Nkrumah and CLR James and Pat Moore talked about. We're trying to actually unify so we can actually get a better deal for Africa. Now we got to get better governance out of Africa. I saw this morning where the Africa Union chose their new chairperson. And quite frankly, he seemed like the old chairperson. I don't see no radical change in how the Africa Union is going to manage the affairs of Africa. I don't see it. Here in Washington, we have 54 African ambassadors. I can say only two of them are worth their credential. You know,
Wow.
Out of the most of them, I don't even know their name. And this is the state of things right now here in the Africa world. So we have a lot of work to do. I think a lot of the effort should be aimed at the next generation because all of us, all three of us, are old men now. We certainly need to be talking to the women. Half of the African people are women. We ought to be talking to all these young people. You'll find that 40% of the populations in Africa are under 25 years of age, and they're getting restless. They're not going to put up with these dictatorships. They're not going to put up with the kleptomaniac governments in many countries in Africa. They're going to demand some form of democracy, free speech, and good governance going forward. So we, as elders, ought to be trying our best. I came up with the concept of YALI, the Young African Leaders
Yeah,
Initiative. I
I
gave to
remember that.
Obama. I think it's the best program ever from the U.S. government. All we doing, one, we allowing the Africans to meet each other. So the one from Senegal is meeting the one from Botswana. And the one from Namibia is meeting the one from Kenya. And the one from Gambia, the smiling coast, they're meeting the one from Tanzania. So I think they're forming networks, they're doing emails. So now they don't look at each other as, oh, you're my enemy, but you're my sister, you're my brother. So I was up in Canada last week, and I told the Canadians to do the same thing. You know, let's try to promote this next generation to think better and to organize better on behalf of Africa and African people.
Okay, Mr. Madi, Melvin raised a very important. He said you have almost 54 African ambassadors in the nation capital in DC, but out of these 52, it's only two that want their salt. What is the way forward for Africans, to take their rightful position, in a geopolitical situation in the US, fighting for Africa?
Well, I'm happy he mentioned Kwame Nkrumah. So Nkrumah has provided us the solution in 1963. He put down a 10-point plan for United States of Africa, for United Africa. And all we got to do, really, is to go back to that plan and implement it. And so if Africa had followed that plan, clearly, we would be talking something different today, because it's such a tragedy that Africa is spoken of in terms of poverty, in terms of violence, in terms of underdevelopment and all these problems, illiteracy and sickness and disease. All right, but it's how do I say this? It's not normal, because Africa has more than any region in this world what it takes to build an advanced, peaceful, healthy society. All right, and so the only reason that has not happened because our leaders failed to do so. I mean, we got only a few like Kwame Nkrumah who came with tangible plan, which the plan is still in place, and that is the plan still now. That anyone who talks about African unity, you don't say anything beyond outside of what Nkrumah said. Even the AU Agenda 2063, every point that they are talking about is what Nkrumah said in 1963. One passport, one citizenship, one army, one economic planning, one currency, and so on and so forth. And so you cannot say anything about how to develop Africa without going back to what Nkrumah laid down. So the blueprint is there.
But how
that
do
would have changed the entire equation in the world.
The blueprint is there, but how do we translate this blueprint into action? Because Africa has been independent for the past 70 years. Some countries, the Gambia is celebrating 60 years of nationhood from the British colonial rule, and still 60 years down the line, we are still dependent on aid.
So we need Africans on the continent and Africans outside the continent, like Melvin here, to work towards that. Okay, we on the continent, our people have to come to the realization that we have been oppressed by our own people, who we elect as presidents, unfortunately, as our leaders, our governments, and our technocrats and intellectuals. They are benefiting from this system that is keeping Africa down. And they are not interested to bring about that cooperation, that unity that is required between Gambia and Senegal, between Nigeria and Ghana, between Angola and Congo, between Uganda and Rwanda, and then among all of us. All right. So we, the people of Africa, and I'm happy he mentioned the Yali idea. All right, because the youth of Gambia have to connect with the youth of Senegal. Yeah. The youth of Senegal have to connect with the youth of Ghana. The youth and women of Ghana have to connect with the women and the youth of Nigeria, and so on and so forth. But to acquire that responsibility, that we are not going to accept bad leadership, misgovernance in this country, and we the people demand that Africa unite. Whilst we do that in Africa, as Africans in Africa, Africans outside of Africa, in the United States, in UK, in Jamaica, in Brazil, all right, in Panama, in Mexico, in Canada, all right, everywhere, at the same time, have to agitate, like Marcus Garvey, like Malcolm X, have to agitate for a free Africa, a united Africa, because ultimately Melvin needs the African passport, like you and I need the African passport. That's what we need to hold. Yes, that African citizenship, he needs to hold it. I need to hold it. That African, in Brazil need to have it. That African in Jamaica needs to have it. That African in Nigeria, when we have that passport, MK, there is no force on earth that can stop Africa, because ultimately the resources that Africa has, all right, the people of Africa put together, we are close to 2 billion people. Okay, so who can stop Africa? Really? Today, America and Europe and Russia and China, they are all coming to Africa.
Yeah, they are rushing. Yeah,
they are making hundreds
they are all
of
coming back to Africa.
Hundreds of billions out of Africa. The only people that are not getting rich out of Africa are the Africans.
It's Africans.
At home and abroad.
Absolutely. The only people that are.
Yeah, the solution, therefore, it's no rocket science, it's no magic.
Yeah,
it is how it has been done everywhere in the world. Our people have to stand up to say, look, enough of poor leadership, enough of corruption, enough of misgovernance, and we want unity. We want unity. We need one African passport, one African government, one African army, one African, embassy in America. We don't need to have 54 embassies in Washington. What are they doing in Washington? 54 ambassadors. What is their use in Washington? Nothing. 54 representatives at the United Nations, 54 ambassadors in Brussels. 54 currencies that you don't even know their names. They are no better than a toilet paper. All right. Absolutely. The dollar, what is the dollar based upon? What is the euro based upon? What is the pound based upon? What resources do they have to back their currencies as compared to Africa, if you had one currency?
Thank you for that. I will come back to Melvin right now. Melvin, assessing the impact, how do you evaluate the overall impact of President Trump Africa policy on the continent, particularly in relation to the economic partnership and aid?
Well, I'm not. I can't say I'm optimistic at all.
Okay.
The decision to dismantle aid, USAID in Africa is more than USAID. You got to know that people like myself are also pushing the U.S. government to do more in Africa. We need. I've done a lot of work with refugees in Africa. I've seen famine victims in Ethiopia.
Right.
There are people in Africa. You and I, we all are eating every day. So we should not be quick to dismiss aid for Africa, because many people in Africa really do need the aid. We ought to try to push for aid in Africa to be better, to do better job of distribution and better job of moving people from aid to trade and to other things. I think the Trump administration in Africa will not do well at all. I don't anticipate them doing anything. Trump does not have any kind of ideal about Africa. The new Assistant Secretary for Africa, the person who's going to be nominated, is a friend of mine. So I'm already having some impact. We talk about these things, and I know I'm going to have some impact on it. I work with the U.S. administration regardless of whether the Republican or Democrat in a nonpartisan fashion. I believe that, in the past, the Republicans actually did very well on the Africa Growth and Opportunity Act. PEPFAR came from George W. Bush, a Republican, So you can't just say because they're Republican, but Trump is something else. And the people that he's putting in place are people who are out and out racist in many regards. And so I don't expect them to take any kind of leadership in Africa whatsoever. Now, the reality of Africa is that it is a wealthy continent. All of the lithium and the cobalt and all of these minerals that the world needs are in Africa. And these people are determined to make sure that these resources come to the U.S. and not China, not Russia. So you got these global powers that are battling for the resources in Africa. Nobody's talking about fair play in Africa. Nobody's talking about empowering African people in a way that this is going to build the continent. They're talking about taking these resources and gobbling them up for the benefit of Western and even Eastern power. Russia is not trying to build Africa. China, have done a lot of infrastructure development in Africa, but I guarantee you, China's bottom line is China. And so Africa has to have a similar strategy of working together, cooperating together, negotiating together in order for Africa to benefit from this hunger and desire for African resources. Now, there's a book, old book called The Confessions of an Economic Hitman. There are people who are working for the World Bank and working for these entities whose job it is to make sure these resources go to various countries. And they're not thinking in the best interest of Africa. I think Africa is going to have to get much more strategic in how it looks at the world, because the world is looking at Africa, but they're looking at Africa to take and not so much looking at Africa to partner for the benefit of humanity. I think one of the things that Trump is doing, he's ignoring climate change. He's ignoring climate change, even though it's affecting us here in the United States, but it's having a devastating impact in Africa and other developing parts of the world that are not equipped to be able to deal with it. And so Trump's motto now is drill, baby, drill. In other words, we're going to drill for more oil. And we all know that this is causing greenhouse gases to explode and all this kind of thing. But yet there's no pushback whatsoever. He's eliminating the Environmental Protection Agency. Wow. So it's just not just USAID, but we're finding that all of the entities that are looking to help and stabilize the world and to help people are being dismantled by this administration as we talk.
Okay. Melvin, you've been to Africa so many times. You met a lot of African head of state, from Nelson Mandela to a whole lot of African leaders. And
I met Jawara when he left power. He came to see me in Washington, and
wow, yeah.
You know, nice guy. He wanted to know if I could help get him restored to power, and I couldn't do that. You know.
Yeah. So you've been to Africa. You visited all. You have conversation with Africans. Why is Africa still aid dependent? Like, we have a lot of resources that we can, elevate our continent, move our continent from abject poverty to wealthiness, like the US. So why do you think Africa is still reliant on aid, to run its affairs? Do you think that?
I think it's a negotiation with the rest of the world. The French have given up on colonialism, but, they're still all over Mali and Niger and Senegal. The British don't think they've given up on Nigeria. Sure enough, they are, they're doing everything in their power to make sure. And so these Western countries, and also the Eastern countries, again, they're going after those natural resources, and they're going after them ferociously. Russia is building military bases for what? Yeah. These military bases, I guess they're going to open one in Port Sudan. They want to do one in Djibouti. Why are they having these military bases? To protect Africans? No. To protect their investment in Africa and to make sure they get those natural resources flowing to their countries. So I think it has a lot to do with how the world views Africa, and they see Africa as a place of massive natural resources, but they think those resources belong to them and not to African people. Mm-hmm. So we have a lot of work to do to change the mindset of my country and these Western countries, as well as China, Russia, and these other countries that are invading Africa. We have a lot of work to do at the United Nations, at the World Bank, at the UN. All of this, we have work to do, and that's why I'm calling on the next generation to prepare themselves, because they're going to have to fight to save Africa. Mm-hmm. So that's what I think.
Yeah, Madi, you are very passionate about African independence, Africa to be, independent, both politically, economically, why do you think Africa is still independent, and how do we break this cycle? Looking at what's right now happening, there is a grab. All the superpowers or all the big nations are coming to Africa. You will hear about Turkey Africa Summit, Russia Africa Summit, US Africa Summit, India Africa Summit. What can Africa do to break this cycle of aid dependence?
I think two things. One is miseducation, and then which also has led to corruption. Miseducation in the sense that our background is slavery and colonialism. For 500 years ago, the Europeans came to Africa, enslaved our people, took them to other lands and killed those people, the Native Americans, and made our people work there. And then, for many years, colonized Africa itself, during which they imposed, their laws, their institutions, their education system, their religions, and everything on the Africans. And so you and I, and like Melvin here, are speaking English, and we are not English. We are Africans, but we are speaking the language.
Melvin can speak Africana, so maybe you can speak Africana with Melvin,
Certainly. I mean, you can speak one or two African languages. I can speak one or two African languages. He can speak one or two African languages. But then when we sit down to meet as Africa, in Addis Ababa, in Abuja, in Banjul, we speak in English or French. All right. Now, that reality is simply because there was slavery and colonialism. And he talked about France, abandoning colonialism, but still remained in Mali and so on. So that out of slavery and colonialism, institutions were created, whether it's United Nations, whether, it's the IMF or the World Bank, or whether it's, or other forms of institutions, which were in the control of our colonial powers. And we submitted, all right, we submitted ourselves to that. Okay, so that you look at the Gambia by 1965, when we are said to have independence, what did we know? All right, what were we able to do? What was the state of the Gambia at 1975, economically, politically, technically, in terms of literacy and so on, the capacity of our people, to run this system that has been imposed on us by the colonial state. So our reality is that by the time we gain independence, we should have had leaders who would have changed or really do decolonization. We have not done proper decolonization. So we maintain the institutions of the colonialists, their education system, and their laws and everything. In the Gambia, still now in our books, you have laws there 1945, 1933, and so on. And it's the same in Senegal, in Ghana, in Nigeria, and so on. So we have failed to decolonize. And colonialism created a mentality. Slavery created a certain mentality, a mentality that makes you and me disrespect, disregard ourselves, have look low upon ourselves, and value the white man, the white woman more than ourselves. All right. So this mentality has lived with us. And then we have the state institutions which are still colonial in structure, in purpose, in practice. And we've been going on that. And the West, knowing full well that they cannot leave Africa. That's why they are still in Mali. That's why they are still using the CFA in
but most of the Francophone countries are pushing France out of Africa now. The latest is Senegal.
Yeah.
There were French bases in Senegal, in Niger, in Burkina Faso.
Yeah, so it will come, because eventually Africans will come to realize that the system we've had since the end of colonialism today, then that neo-colonial system is not working. And so there will emerge a time, contradictions will arise between the technocrats, the leaders. And so you will see, like what is happening in Mali or Burkina Faso, some kicking out France. It will happen, in due course, all right? But the reason it is not happening right now, because the current neo-colonial system we have in Africa, we have African leaders benefiting from it. We have scores of African intellectuals, African technocrats benefiting from it. All right. So they don't want to dismantle, decolonize Africa and their countries and stop aid and begin to be self-reliant. Because what is happening is cheap for them, it's easy for them. All right. They keep their people, controlled, abused, oppressed, exploited, and the people, because they lack the whole political awareness, people accept them. And so, you come to the Gambia or Senegal or Nigeria, you drive around, the people with the biggest vehicles, with the best homes, with the best opportunities are people inside the government or in this, NGO sector and so on, or in the private sector, because they are benefiting from the system. So they don't want to disrupt the system. Right. So until we have consensus leaders like Nkrumah, who saw at the very beginning that we have to decolonize. We had leaders like that who realized that we had to decolonize. All right, Lumumba in Congo. But look at what the West did. They orchestrated a coup d'etat against Nkrumah. They assassinated, Belgium assassinated Lumumba, and the examples are many. So the West, America, and Europe are here supporting autocrats. They are supporting rebel movements. They are creating rebel groups. They are, fomenting all this violence that is going on. They have their military bases across Africa. And the elite are benefiting, the African elite are benefiting from it. And so this is why we are in this situation. So until we have consensus African intellectuals, journalists like you, intellectuals, like me, like Melvin here, all right, political leaders, all right, who are ready to suffer, who are ready to sacrifice the benefits, the privileges they're enjoying. No, MK, we will be like this for another 500 years.
Yes.
So it's
Thank
a
you
very
very much. Yeah,
yeah.
thank you very much. I will go to Melvin because he seems to be keenly listening to your conversation on Africa. Both of you are very passionate about the development of Africa. Melvin, let's come back to the role of civil society. You have been in the civil society issues for quite a long time. So what role do you think the civil society should play in mitigating the negative impact of the decreased US aid and Africa engagement in Africa?
Well, there's two things I
What?
would say. Here in the United States, most Americans are uneducated, undereducated, or miseducated about Africa. Now, we
Yeah.
know that. Here in Washington, sure, you talk about Africa, that's all we do all day long. But if you go 100 miles outside of Washington and you say, how many countries are in Africa, you would be shocked at the answer you would get. If you say, what is the capital of Gambia, who would know? Very few. Name two African presidents. They would say, oh, Nelson Mandela. Mandela's been dead for how long? And so when we think about one of the things I've tried to do is to take on this. I've done town hall meetings all across the U.S., but I'm starving to do it. I have to really struggle to do it. Now, one, you would think the African countries would say, look, you're working in Washington, you work in the United States, let's give you the resources you need to do the job. That's what Israel do. Israel got a strong diaspora here that lobbies and leans on Congress to get everything Israel wants from this diaspora. But here in the United States, when we look at the African, now we lobbied hard in the 60s and 70s and 80s to get the United States to increase the numbers of Africans who could come to this country. This is the Congressional Black Caucus. People like myself, this is what we did. We saw them inviting Germans, Swedes, Danes, everybody else, but not Africans. So they lifted the numbers of Africans who could come to this country. What happened to these Africans? Many of them came, and next thing you know, they gave them scholarships way out in the far out in the white neighborhoods. By the time they brought them to Washington to work at the State Department and the AID Brookings Institution and so forth, they hate Black Americans. They hate the very people who actually pushed them. They see us as violent. They see us as so there's a real divide between the African immigrants and the African Americans. Now here comes Trump. And Trump, one of his first things is to kick out anybody who's an illegal immigrant, if you will. So many Africans are falling in that category, and here come the police grabbing them to send them to Nigeria, send them to wherever. And now the Africans are shaking. They pushed all the Black people out of the U.S. government. So you don't find Black people anymore. It was a lot of African immigrants who replaced African Americans. Now they got pushed out. And so now all of a sudden hey, my brother, what can we do? Can we talk? Whoa, we missed the opportunity of unity. And to me, this is going to hold us back for decades to come until we figure out. Now, next month, in fact, you mentioned Marcus Garvey. Marcus Garvey's son is my good friend. And we're going to be holding a forum at the end of this month to celebrate. We got Biden to finally pardon Marcus Garvey. And so we're planning a celebration, mainly aimed at getting us all on the same page. We're all in the same boat. Whether you came here by the slave ship or you came by airplane, you're still in the same boat. You're Black. And that's the message that we're trying to get our people to understand. But I think it's a hard thing culture is a hard. We already knew that Nigerians don't talk to Senegalese. And the Malians don't talk to the Ethiopian. We all knew ethnicity and all of this stuff found Africans pitted against each other. That all worked well for the Europeans. They knew that they could easily start a fight between the Ethiopians and the Somalis. They knew that, so they play that off and get you fighting each other. And then one of them come and sell you weapons. Then they go to the other side and sell weapons to the other side. We have a lot of work to do to get this thing clarified. But right now we're being played by all sides. What the aim of this is to get your oil, your gas, your coltan, your lithium, all of these minerals from Africa. That is the bottom line for these people. They don't care about you. And the last thing they want is unity between African people. The last thing they want is African Americans, and other Africans in the diaspora to be working together. So if you think it's going to be easy, I think you're fooling yourself. These people are going to do everything possible to make sure we never unify, because that's the last thing that they want.
The last thing they want is Africa to never unify. I will go back to Madi Jobarteh because we are almost at the tail end of this very interesting conversation, beautiful conversation. Madi, the Gambia in 2-3 days will celebrate what is known as the Diamond Jubilee. 60 years since the British gave us independence. Give us your assessment of Gambia at 60. What is at stake? Are we truly independent economically, politically, socially? You name it.
Well, what I can say is we've done very badly. We've not helped ourselves at all to care for the Gambia, to look after the Gambia that is ours, to build the kind of Gambia that we deserve, so that 60 years later, the incidents of misgovernance, bad governance, poor leadership, the corruption and the poverty and the deprivation is widespread. And simply because, once again, individuals that we have put in charge of public office to manage the affairs and the resources of the Gambia, according to law, abandon that responsibility. But at the same time, we, the citizens, also abandon our responsibility, our duty, our right and duty to defend this country, to demand accountability, so that we have a country that we deserve. So 60 years later, I think we are in a very terrible situation, and I hope Gambians will take the moment to be honest to themselves, to be honest to ourselves, to be pragmatic, to be realistic, and recognize our failures, so that we would be in a position to determine how do we go from here for the next 60 years. But certainly from 1965 to 2025, I think it's a bad performance. It's a bad job that we did. I'm not proud of this Gambia at all. I strongly believe we could have created a better Gambia, because Gambia has all the potentials, all the resources, all the opportunities to have created an advanced society, as any other society in the world. And the evidence is there, because we had one society which also gained independence in 1965, which is Singapore, which, with proper leadership, and citizenship, they were able to raise themselves to the level of a first world country status, within, two generations. So it's with deep regret for me, really, and sadness that at 60 years, this is the state of the Gambia. When you look at all the indicators, social, economic, political indicators, you realize that we are in a very bad situation. The country is in too much debt. The country is, there's too much poverty. The country is, in a situation where basic services are difficult to obtain: healthcare, education, water, electricity. All right. In a way that you just cannot get it, because what does it take to provide water to a community? What does it take to provide electricity? What does it take to make health facilities function? Be equipped very well. What does it take to make public schools, function and deliver quality education to our people? What does it take for us to be able to feed ourselves? So that when you look at all the indicators, indeed, I think it has been a mess, over the past 60 years, a failure of leadership and citizenship put together.
A failure of citizenship and leadership together. Gambia celebrates 60 years of nationhood. That's Mr. Madi Jobarteh, the executive director of the Banjul-based Edward Francis Small Center for Right and Justice. Melvin, before I let you go, what message would you like to convey to the U.S. policymaker regarding the importance of maintaining a robust partnership with African nations, and what specific action should they take going forward?
Well, we're in the process of my organization. We have a delegation together that we're actually writing our policy recommendations to the Trump administration. We did the same thing to Obama. We did it to Biden. We done it to, and we got a lot of things done. Yali, as I mentioned, that was done by us. PEPFAR, we lobbied Bush administration. We wanted $3 billion. He came up with $19 billion, blew us away. But you got so we're doing the same thing with Trump, and we're in the process of putting our recommendations in order. And I'm going to wait until the assistant secretary is appointed to present them to him. And I think that some of those are going to get through, and we're going to lobby and push to try to get the best we can for Africa. At the same time, we're going to work to build unity among African people. One of the things I want to do next year is to have a Western Hemisphere African Diaspora Conference. We can do it by technology, StreamYard or Zoom or something, but everybody from Argentina all the way up through Canada, we need to have the leaders come together to talk about unity and cooperation. How best do we work with the Continental Free Trade Area? How best we work with Africa to deliver on some of these promises that the continent holds. So mine is Africa for the African people at home and abroad, and we're going to continue to work. We are African people, and to our dying day, we're going to continue to work for the benefit of Africa.
Okay. Melvin, you had the opportunity to see both administrations, the Republican president, the Democrat president. Which leadership, Democrats and Republicans, is more pro-African or has more, support given to Africa? Republican, Democrat?
Well, it doesn't matter. The Democrats are nicer, if you will. But when I look at what the Republicans delivered on AGOA, I give the wherewithal to the Republicans on a PEPFAR. That was a George W. Bush administration Republican. But at the same time, I thought Obama did well. I thought Biden did fairly well, and we could have done a lot more these past 4 years than we did. So I don't expect either side to have Africa at its, to be looking out for Africa if the African diaspora is not pushing. So what Africa needs is a strong diaspora here in the United States that's lobbying and pushing for Africa at every twist and turn. Don't think that the white man is going to look out for Africa. No way, either Republican or Democrat, neither one. So it's all dependent on us. Africa is dependent on African unity at home and abroad.
Okay, thank you very much. That's Melvin Foote, a prominent African-American civil society leader, speaking to me from Washington, D.C. Madi Jobarteh, final word, the way forward for African unity, because Africans have been used against each other, and then this has made a way for our colonial masters, because they believe if we are united, that is not good for them. But the moment we are disunited, they can have a free right in our capitals, grabbing our resources. The way forward for African unity, before I let two of you go.
Well, I mean, the way forward for African unity is for Africans to stand up and demand it now. Is for our leaders to make it happen. Is for our Africans in the diaspora, like Melville here, as he talked about this Irish lobby or the Israeli lobby in America. We need an African lobby down there as well, and and we have to do this. MK, the state of the world demands it. If one understands the geopolitics around the world right now, it is an existential imperative that Africa unites. Our salvation, our security, our survival, our existence cannot be guaranteed by America or Europe or Russia or China. I think we have more than enough evidence that America or Europe, Russia, and China are only interested in their own interests first and foremost. And their presence in Africa is only to maintain their hegemony and their power and control of Africa. So if they colonized us, enslaved us centuries ago, and colonized us centuries ago, rest assured, if they can do it again, they will do it. If others can do it, they will do it. So we shouldn't be here as Africans trying to be nice, trying to fool around. I mean, there's one God in the world, all right? And, he's not coming here to defend us just like that. Otherwise, we would not have been enslaved. We would not have been colonized, all right? And the Europeans, they saw that God anyway, and so on. But then at the same time, they went ahead to do what they did to us. And we still see the same imperialist white supremacist agenda is what is playing out every day across the world. Now the Chinese have come in, the Russians have come in. So the available evidence in the world tells us that unity is inevitable. It's a necessity. All right. It's a necessity. And so how we do this, it is a job of you and me and Melvin and every African, from Banjul to Addis Ababa, from Cape Town to Cairo, from Abuja to Brazil, from, Washington to London. All of us have to make sure we demand that Africa unites for our salvation. And a united Africa is even a blessing for the world. Because I'm sure a united Africa will not be unjust and and violent like the United States or like the European Union or the Europeans or some other people like the Russians and so on. So we don't have to colonize anybody. We will not go and grab anybody's resources because we have enough. We will not go and occupy anybody's lands because we have enough land in Africa. Where are we going? We'll just bring back our people, to come and join us. So that's all. So Melvin, it's great to meet you, and keep up the great work you are doing. Pretty inspiring to know you are behind the Yali and everything else. So thank you so much for that. You
guys can share contacts after this. So anyway, gentlemen, many thanks for joining us on this special final take today. Madi Jobarteh join me live from Banjul. Madi, many thanks. You have always been available when I call. Likewise, Dr. Melvin Foote, who joined me live from Washington, D.C. Melvin also has been doing a great job about Africa in D.C. So many, many thanks, guys, for the good job you are doing. And do join me anytime I call on your doors. Until then, bye-bye. Do have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
Tune into the final take with MK Mariner every Saturday on the Alcamba Times and experience extensive conversations on a variety of topics, including national and international headlines, breaking issues, and major developments in politics, business, innovation, science, and sports, along with inspiring stories and expert analysis to provide a comprehensive understanding of the news.